The call came at 6 in the morning. A polar bear was lying in the yard of a police deputy's house in a coastal village, 300 kilometers from the nearest Arctic habitat. Exhausted, starving, and not moving, Daniel Hayes had been doing wildlife relocation work for 9 years. He had dealt with brown bears, wolves, and injured elk. He had never dealt with anything like this. He drove 2 hours to a village called Krestova, half expecting to find out it was a mistake. It was not a mistake. Drop your city or country in the comments. We love knowing where these stories reach. Now, enjoy watching. The call came at 6 in the morning. Daniel Hayes was already awake. He was always awake before anyone called, which was one of the less convenient things about doing the kind of work he did. He had his coffee. He was reading weather reports for the Okhotsk coast. He was not expecting what came through on the line. A polar bear. In a village, lying in the yard of a police officer's house, not moving. Local authorities had already been on scene for 2 hours. They did not know what to do with it, and they needed someone who did. Daniel asked how large. "Very large," said the voice on the phone. He asked if it was aggressive. "No," said the voice. "That is the problem." He put down the coffee. He was in the truck in 4 minutes. The drive to Krestova took 2 hours on roads, passable only because the ground was still frozen. It was early spring along the Sea of Okhotsk coast, the season when the ice begins to make decisions. When things that were fixed start moving. When the boundary between one world and another becomes unreliable. He thought about the call the whole drive. Not aggressive. That phrase sat with him. A healthy polar bear, cornered or surprised or hungry, does not simply lie down in a stranger's yard and stop. The absence of aggression was not reassurance. It was information, the kind that meant something was seriously wrong. He pulled into Krestova just before 9 in the morning. There were already 40 people standing in the road. He saw the bear before he saw anything else. It was lying in the yard of a low wooden house. The house belonged to Garrett Hale, a deputy with the local police, who had come out at first light to find the most unexpected thing he had ever found in it. The bear was on its side in the snow. Enormous, even collapsed, white coat gray with dust and salt and the particular exhaustion of an animal that had been traveling too long on too little. Garrett had done the right things. He had kept people back, called his supervisor, called the regional wildlife line, and stayed in the yard to make sure no one did anything that would escalate the situation. By the time Daniel arrived, Garrett had been standing there for 2.5 hours, and the crowd had tripled. Daniel pulled on his gloves, stepped over the fence, and crouched down about 6 meters from the bear. He stayed there for a while without doing anything. What he was looking at told him a lot. The bear was young, 2 years old at most, possibly younger. Male. The condition of his coat said he had been without proper food for, at minimum, a week, probably longer. His breathing was audible from 6 meters away, which at that size meant the effort was greater than it should be, and his right front paw was wrong. Not catastrophically, no visible wound from this distance, but the angle at which it rested on the snow was the angle of something being avoided. Not rested. He had been injured, and he had come a considerable distance with that injury. Before we continue, if you are watching from somewhere out there right now, drop your city or country in the comments. It always means something to us to know how far these stories travel. The question of how a polar bear ends up 300 kilometers south of its normal habitat is one that the coast of the Sea of Okhotsk has provided answers to before. In spring, when melt accelerates, sections of pack ice break away from the main body and begin to drift with the current. A young bear, inexperienced, focused on hunting at the ice edge, can be carried away on a floe before it understands what is happening. The current along this section of coast runs south and east. What begins as a few meters of open water between the floe and the shore can become, within hours, a gap that cannot be crossed. Most animals carried south this way do not survive. The ones that do wash up on coastlines they were never designed for, hungry and lost, and far from anything they recognize. This one had made it to shore. He had walked on a damaged paw, in unfamiliar terrain, until he found the only thing that offered any shelter: a village. The sound of people nearby, a yard with a low fence, and no predators. He had lain down, and he had stayed. At 9:30, the bear tried to stand. The crowd went quiet in the way that crowds go quiet when something large moves unexpectedly. He got his back legs under him, pushed forward, and the right front paw buckled. He stayed upright for a moment on 3 legs, surveying the circle of people around him with a steadiness that had nothing of panic in it. Then he lay back down. Daniel called Dr. Nina Voss, who was the most experienced wildlife veterinarian operating in this part of the coast. He told her what he was looking at and what he thought needed to happen. She said she would be there by early afternoon. He went back to the yard. The bear had not moved. Nobody knew what to do next. That was the honest truth of it. Have you ever seen an animal that was truly lost, not just wandered, but genuinely outside of everything it understood? There is a specific quality to that kind of stillness. An animal that does not know which way to move, so it does not move at all. It waits. Most people who have spent time around animals or who have been far from home themselves at some point in their lives will recognize it. The bear had it. Krestova stood around him, and nobody quite knew what came next. Dr. Nina Voss arrived at 1:15. She assessed the bear with the systematic efficiency of someone who has made quick decisions about large animals in the field many times before. The right front paw had a soft tissue injury, not a fracture, but significant enough to make sustained travel impossible. The animal was severely underweight, dehydrated. The injury had likely been sustained during the ice drift or the long swim to shore. She said he needed several days of stabilization before transport could be safely attempted. Daniel asked what transport would mean. She said it had to be air. Ground was not an option for an animal in this condition over this distance. The only place that made sense for his release was the Arctic coastal zone, 900 kilometers north. That meant a cargo flight, a reinforced crate, sedation, and coordination with the Wildlife Authority on the northern end. Daniel wrote that down. The fish came on day 2. Nobody had organized it. A woman who ran the general store drove to the harbor at dawn, bought herring and capelin directly from the boats, and brought it to the pen in 2 large buckets. By the time Daniel arrived at 7 in the morning, 3 more people were waiting with fish from their own freezers. He watched Crest eat for the first time. It was not elegant. It was the eating of an animal with days of debt to pay off, but the paw held steady enough to brace against the ground. The eyes were clearer. Children came to the fence every afternoon. They left drawings weighted down with stones, crayon bears, marker bears, bears in the snow with the village behind them. Some drawings had names on them. The children's own names, signed carefully in the way children sign things they mean to keep. Daniel kept every one of them. He did not write that in the log. 9 days. That was how long it took to arrange the aircraft, build the transport crate to spec, coordinate the receiving team at the northern station, obtain the permits, source the sedation protocols appropriate for an animal this size, and give the bear himself enough time to stabilize. 9 days in Krestova. In early spring, with a polar bear in a converted pen behind the police station. Daniel stayed. He had not planned to. He had planned to hand off to Voss and return to his own work, but the logistics kept requiring decisions that required someone on site, and after the second day, he stopped thinking about leaving. Garrett brought him coffee in the mornings. The village had opinions about the bear, unanimous ones. He should go home. Whatever it took to get him there was worth doing. Daniel did not disagree. He kept the daily log the way he always kept logs: condition, weight, food intake, behavior. He did not give the animal a name. That was a standard discipline in relocation work. You did not name them. On day 4, almost without meaning to, he wrote a single word in the margin: Crest. After the village, he did not explain it, even to himself. The sedation on departure morning went smoothly. Dr. Voss handled the dose calculation herself. The loading was careful, unhurried, the crew moving with the particular attention of people who understand that one wrong movement could change everything. The crate went into the cargo hold of a mid-sized transport aircraft at just after 6 in the morning on the 9th day. Garrett was there. 3 of the village women who had been bringing fish every day were there, standing at the airfield fence in the early light. Nobody said much. The plane lifted off cleanly. The flight north to the Arctic coastal station was scheduled for 4 hours and 20 minutes. At 3 hours and 40 minutes, the crate moved. The sedation had worn off early. It happens: body mass, metabolic rate, stress, chemistry. None of it is perfectly predictable in a wild animal under these conditions. Daniel was in the cargo area when it started a low sound first, the kind that travels through the floor of an aircraft in a way that is difficult to describe but impossible to mistake. Then the crate shifted on its mount, not enough to break the restraints, but enough to be felt by everyone on board. The crew looked at Daniel. He held up one hand. Give him a moment. He moved to within 2 meters of the crate and crouched down. He spoke in a low, even voice, not words with any particular meaning, but sound. The consistent frequency of a human voice that was not alarmed, not going anywhere, simply present. He had done this before with other animals in other situations. He did not know if it worked. He knew it was the only thing available. The movement inside the crate slowed. The sounds changed lower, less urgent. After 4 minutes, the crate was still. The crew breathed. The pilot came on the intercom and asked for a status report. Daniel said they were fine. He stayed where he was for the rest of the flight. The Arctic coastal station was snow and flat light and the particular cold that has no argument in it. The cold that simply is. The receiving team had the area cleared and the perimeter set before the aircraft stopped moving. Daniel and Voss were first out. The crate was brought down to ground level and positioned with its door facing the open snowfield to the north. The latches were released. The door swung open. Krest did not move for almost a minute. He lay in the crate with his head up, reading the air. What he was receiving: the smell of snow, the sound of nothing. The particular quality of cold that belonged to him was not anything Daniel could name. But the quality of his stillness changed. It was no longer the stillness of an animal waiting. It was the stillness of an animal arriving. He put his right front paw forward first. It held. He stepped out of the crate and stood on the snow. He stood there for a long moment, head low, breathing in. The receiving team was motionless. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Then he walked. Then he ran. He went north across the snowfield with the particular fluid power of an animal that has found its surface again, the exact surface its body was built for, that everything about it had been designed to move across. Within 2 minutes, he had reached the ridgeline. Within 3, he had cleared it. He did not look back. Daniel stood at the open crate door for a while after Crest had gone. The wind came in from the north, steady and clean and indifferent in the way Arctic wind is always indifferent. It does not distinguish between what matters and what does not. He opened the log to the last entry. He looked at the word in the margin from day 4. Then he wrote one more line underneath it. There are things in this work that get filed and things that do not. The permits get filed. The condition reports, the transport documentation, the weight charts, all of it gets filed. What does not get filed is the moment when an animal that has been lost, carried far from everything it understood, held up for 9 days by fish from strangers and crayon drawings left at a fence, steps back onto the ground it belongs to, and moves, and is gone. That part you carry differently. A 2023 report from the Polar Bear Specialist Group, published through the International Union for Conservation of Nature, documented a significant rise in stranding events along the Sea of Okhotsk and adjacent coastal zones, directly linked to accelerating spring ice breakup. Young males, animals in their first and second years, still learning the rhythms of the ice, account for over 60% of confirmed drift displacement cases. Most do not survive. A 2022 study in Oryx, the International Journal of Conservation, found that community involvement in large carnivore rescue operations significantly improved both animal outcomes and long-term local conservation attitudes. What happened in Krestova was not accidental. It was what happens when the people closest to the problem decide that the problem matters. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of what it means to show up for something that cannot ask you in words, leave a comment and tell us. Share it with someone who needs a quiet, true story today. Subscribe if you are not already here. There are more of these coming. Every one of them is true in the ways that matter.